is, what the weather like and the seasonality of it. So, in say December or January or February, I know that if I want to fish Boulder Creek, it's probably going to be through town, and it's probably going to be, mostly nymphs through deeper runs. What really, to me, is some of the better water would be the water that's in the canyon, and that basically is from the edge of town all the way up Highway 119 to mile marker 29. Once you get up to 29, it basically turns private, and then you're on to the reservoir. So Boulder Creek has a tailwater section that comes out of Barker Reservoir in Middle Boulder Creek, and then you have a freestone section of North Boulder Creek that joins, and that joining happens in the canyon. That's called Boulder Falls, and that's roughly, if I'm not mistaken, mile marker 33 and a half. So, when we talk about Boulder Creek and fishing Boulder Creek or Boulder Canyon, to me, the main area to target would be that roughly 12 miles of the canyon. So we'll get into that as a section of the part of the presentation a little bit more in a minute. I also want to touch on South Boulder Creek, which is, the third stem or the third branch of Boulder Creek. That starts in the James Peak Wilderness, and that's basically west of Rollinsville. This stream and this section of stream in particular is augmented by water from the Moffett Tunnel. Many of you may be familiar with, the Big Thompson Water Project, which is a project that built reservoirs on the west side of the divide to store water so that we could pull water from other streams and dump it into basins on the Front Range to bring water to an expanding Front Range population. So a lot of the water in South Boulder Creek comes from the Fraser River via the Moffett Tunnel, comes out of that tunnel right west of Rollinsville. And some of the lakes up there that, some of the lakes up there that are worth hiking to or even driving to, because a 4x4 can make it up there for some pretty cool camping, would be Forest Lakes, Jenny Lake, and even Crater Lake. And these are spots where you might find some greenback cutthroat, some big brookies. There's a local organization in Boulder called the Boulder Fish and Game Club. And these guys have been around since 1908, if I'm not mistaken. And so they, from time to time, will get, real small greenbacks, and they'll organize some hiking parties to go up and stock some of those lakes up there. And the history of that organization is pretty cool, because they have some pictures of these guys with mules and old milk cans filled with these little fingerling trout. And it's interesting, every single one of the pictures, everybody in the picture is smoking a cigarette. I remember that, thought that was interesting, that back in the 50s, these guys are all smoking cigarettes before they're hiking up 5-6 miles to stock some of the streams. So the stream, South Boulder Creek, comes basically joins that Moffett Tunnel flow right there at the, where the ski train would go through the mountain to get over to Winter Park. It rolls east. It's pretty quick. It's been slightly channelized in some areas when they graded the railroad through there. So in some spots it moves pretty fast, but there is a little bit of access. Upstream of the town of Rollinsville, there's a spot called the Interpretive Site. And the Interpretive Site is not that well known. It's almost a mile of water. It's very, very pretty, a small parking lot. And it also is a lot cooler at elevation. So that's a spot when the flows are appropriate, that we like to send people or recommend people go to. It's, beautiful, picturesque, the Continental Divide is right there. And they also have a good mix of fish. There's some cutthroat in there, brooks, browns, rainbows. So you could, in theory, catch, a grand slam in that section of river up there. Unfortunately, over the last, 10, 15, even 20 years, some of the areas that used to be public or seem public have gone away as, people have come in and started posting signs. And it's kind of sad to see what maybe was public or, any of the public accesses out there go away. I certainly sad to see some of the spots where I used to go fish not be available to anymore because, different, land deals and stuff like that have gone through. Once you get past Rollinsville, the stream goes down past Pine Cliff, and then it enters into Gross Reservoir. Gross Reservoir, very large, deep reservoir. Definitely some controversial expansion projects going on with Gross Reservoir right now. But Gross Reservoir, very deep. The water stays very, very cold. And below Gross Reservoir, we actually have a wonderful tailwater, South Boulder Creek tailwater at what's called Walker Ranch. So Walker Ranch tailwater, great spot to go. No roads next to it. If you like to hike, it's an amazing spot to, pack a lunch, take your dog with you. It's a place where you can lose yourself in the moment, even though you're only 13 miles from Boulder. So for somebody who likes a wilderness experience, South Boulder Creek at Walker Ranch, basically could fulfill that need almost any day of the year because it is a tailwater. It's just very susceptible to changing flows, and those flows are regulated due to the needs of Denver water, which means they can be up, they can be down depending upon what's going on with water needs up and down the Front Range. For this area as well, South Boulder Creek, those sky terrain maps are great. And then our local Trout Unlimited chapter, the Boulder Fly Casters, they also have a map they sell called the Boulder Watershed Map, and that's a great map, generates funds for that organization. But it also has, wonderful access points, great maps, a little bit of history, that sort of thing. I think the next slide, or this next slide, yeah, so here we go. So what we're going to target is we're going to target Middle Boulder Creek. We're also going to talk about South Boulder Creek. And we're primarily going to talk about those two streams in the canyon section and then also the Walker Ranch section. So this map that we're looking at here, this is part of the map that is the Boulder Fly Casters Map, their little logo at the bottom. And this basically breaks Boulder Creek or Middle Boulder Creek, down into town all the way up to Barker Reservoir. If you want to fish town, the town access starts at the west edge of Boulder at a park called Evan Fine Park. Evan Fine Park's got the Boulder Creek path right next to it. It's got wonderful kayak pools where, similar to what you guys maybe realized down right in Golden on Clear Creek, where they've come in and put some artificial wing dams and structures and things like that in, and that helps to keep the pools a little bit deeper and good habitat for the trout during low flows. We sometimes see the flows on Boulder Creek maybe be as low as 10 CFS, and during runoff, the flows might be 500 CFS. I typically, to fish town, if it's above 300, I typically leave it alone, but it can be done at flows above 300 CFS. We also, we see a little bit more pollution in town. We have some issues with some different contaminants that have been found in the creek. So if you fish town, I would always advise the wearing of waders and, maybe not getting in the water quite as much as you would if you were outside of town. I think that there's some E. coli and some different problems that the city and the town have trouble managing. So I just think that if you want to be a little bit safer, it's best to wear your wading gear and try not to come in contact with the water in town. But that's up to you. We have fewer hatches through town, and that might be because of the lack of good water quality. We do get red quills, we do get mayflies, we do have caddis, and we do have some little stones that show up, but we typically don't have them in the numbers that we have up in the canyon where there's better oxygen, that sort of thing. Two flies that seem to always work on the creek through town would be the San Juan worm and the leech, and those are two kind of dirty flies, if you will. So those flies seem to always catch fish. And, if it was, November, December, January, or February, and you want to fish Boulder Creek, you're probably rocking a 2-fly nymph rig, 2, 4, maybe even 6 feet deep. Some of the pools through town are deeper, but, sometimes you may have to walk 100 yards to get to the next piece of water that is going to hold fish. We just did a cleanup with a small organization, just of a little section through town, and I was actually pleased to see how many fish I was scaring as I was moving up through water that kind of looked a little skinny to be holding fish. And we find that the fish through town tend to be almost entirely browns, most likely because of the fact that they're more tolerant of pollution, contaminants, that sort of thing. So, if I said the access through town was almost continuous along the Boulder Creek path from Evan Fine Park, moving east all the way to 55th Street. And once you get out past 55th Street, we start to see some seasonal closures or closures due to mud snails and zebra mussels. There is, however, one access point at 75th Street. It's called Heatherwood. And Heatherwood is a trail that basically will follow the river upstream for maybe a half, maybe 2/3 of a mile. And that's a spot where some people go and throw streamers and catch some bigger fish. The bigger fish on Boulder Creek are through town or tend to be through town. And that might be because the water is open and moving all year long or almost all year long. It only freezes 1 or 2 days out of the year. And, you know, the bigger fish can be found through town. They tend to be browns. A lot of times we see them, you know, September, October, that sort of thing. Not too many rainbows in town, but we do find some escapees from the kids' ponds. The kids' ponds don't have any excluders to keep the fish from leaving the kids' ponds. And that outfit, Boulder Fish and Game, they stock the kids' ponds. The Boulder Fish and Game, that the organization from been around since 1908, they have a small fish rearing facility, which is kind of across from Boulder Library. And they stock the kids' ponds around Memorial Day, and then they stock them, I think, every, you know, twice a month throughout the course of the season.
Excuse me, Randy.
Yeah.
Somebody was wanting to know where they could get that map that you just showed.
That Boulder Fly. So if you could get it. Well, I sell it. Any fly shop in Boulder sells it. McGuckin's Hardware sells it. And then if you reached out to Boulder Fly Casters, and they have Facebook page, they have a website, their logo's in the bottom left-hand corner of that map there. So you could get that. You could get, yeah, there you go. You could reach out to them and get the map. And I want to say, I think it's like $14, maybe $15. The St. Vrain chapter of Trout Unlimited also has a similar map for the St. Vrain as well.
All right, thank you.
So that other slide that had some pictures of fish, you know, size doesn't matter. You know, average size of fish in the creek to me, or the fish I catch, tends to be, you know, 6 inches, 8 inches, 10 inches. If I catch a 12 or a 14 incher, that's a really nice fish. The young man, Mr. Fournier, on the bottom right there, that's a 27-inch brown that he and his brother caught a few years back up by the library. So we do see some larger fish through town. I do not think that targeting or coming to Boulder Creek and expecting to catch a fish that big is a high probability. In fact, I find that it tends to be, you know, 6 to 12 inches is the norm, like the fish in the other two pictures there for sure. As we move west, or one of the things to note about the town section of Boulder Creek, the use on the creek has been going up the past few years, and we've seen more recreation along Boulder Creek, which means, you know, if you go out and fish the creek through town in the morning, chances are you're not going to run into anybody that's going to impact your day. But if you're doing that at like noon on a Friday and it's 4th of July weekend, then rafters and tubers and recreators and stand-up paddle boarders and people with their dogs, you know, that sort of thing, you know, definitely becomes an issue. So it's kind of, you know, a mixed use, and we all need to share the water. But, you know, on a hot day in the summertime, I'm not expecting to go to Evan Fine Park and have nobody be there. So, you know, town is something that we fish a lot of times on the shoulder seasons or winter. And then we have this wonderful 12 miles of the canyon once it gets hot and people start recreating on the creek in town. So we'll start to talk about Boulder Canyon up in the canyon along Highway 119. You know, people always ask, hey, how do I get to Boulder Creek? I'm like, you go to Canyon Boulevard and you turn left to head west, and Canyon Boulevard takes you up the canyon. Highway 119, and that map from Boulder Fly Casters is a great map because it has the mile markers, it has all the pull-offs and everything lined up for you there. Mile markers, I think, are in red. Pull-offs are in black. Boulder Falls comes in roughly halfway up. So we'll talk about the fishing and the technique, you know, for fishing the creek. We recommend a dry dropper rig for the creek. Boulder Creek in the canyon tends to be more pocket water, and we really don't need to present flies, especially if we're fishing it April through October. We don't really need to dredge the bottom in there. We tend to fish Dry dropper setups, I mean, you know, it sounds gluttonous, but like any color chubby Chernobyl size 12, 14, or 16 with a soft hackle CDC pheasant tail. Some of the new jig flies like the Duracell jig or the Spanish bullet have been particularly effective. We get more bugs in the canyon. We even get some Pteronarcis in the canyon. We do get midges. We have mayflies, blue-wing olives. We get little yellow sallies. We get small winter stones that are black and brown. We get some nice drakes. We also get red quills. And then, you know, even in the past 2 weeks, just walking the creek in the dry grass on the edge of the creek, I've already seen grasshoppers that are an inch and a half long. So beetles and ants and grasshoppers are also other, you know, great bugs. And, you know, being that a drake is typically a size like 14, you know, that an olive chubby Chernobyl as a dry fly kind of looks a little bit like a drake, looks a little bit like a grasshopper, looks a little bit like a stonefly. So, you know, it's a great way to fish the creek. It's an easy way to fish the creek. You certainly don't have to fish a dropper. You can fish just dries if you want to. But, you know, we always start to see fish come to the chubby sometime in March and then pretty regularly come April. And, you know, ironically, or not ironically, but the upper section of the creek, which is basically from mile marker 32 to 29, the mile markers get smaller as you go up. So the edge of Boulder is roughly right around 41, and they get smaller as you go upstream. But that top section and the topography of that top section make it the section that once runoff hits and starts to subside, you know, knowing what section is more appropriate to fish can have you not scratching your head, I guess. And that upper section is usually the section that fishes best. You know, an example would be as such. You know, right now, if you came and looked at Boulder Creek in town, you know, it was up to almost 150 CFS at one point with the rain and dirty, you know, visibility, you know, barely a foot, if that. And to me, 1 foot is kind of like where I sort of draw the line and say, can I make it happen or can't I make it happen? You know, anything less than that, it's hard for the fish to see or fly. So, you know, people are coming into the shop right now and saying, gosh, the creek looks so high and dirty, you know what I mean? Where should I go fishing? Well, go fish upper Boulder Creek right now. You know, by going up the canyon, you basically get above 4 mile. 4 miles about, you know, 2-3 miles outside of town. And 4 miles history is, you know, ravaged by the floods of 2013. And I think there was a fire in 2008. And both of those events are still, you know, undergoing repair efforts, I guess, to you know, to fix both the flooding and the burning. So when it rains or when, you know, runoff starts, 4 miles puking sometimes. It's the dirtiest water or the dirtiest tributary on the creek. So just heading west and getting above 4 mile, the water's clearer. And then you get up above mile marker 35 where the falls comes in, and all of a sudden the water is a lot lower and a lot clearer. So what you see in town is not what you would see on the creek as you drove up it. As you drove up it, the water is typically going to get lower and clearer. You know, and right now, knowing what I know, Barker Reservoir very low, inflow into Barker is only about 30 or 40 CFS. You know, Barker spills every year, and when it spills is when we realize the highest water of the year, and that's usually sometime late May, early June. But right now, again, the water in town is dirty. Upstream from 4 mile, it's a little bit clear, but still high. And then when you get upstream of Boulder Falls and upstream of even what we'll call like Rogers Park or Castle Rock, it's clear and low, and the technique to fish up there is, you know, a little different than what you might employ or what you might use in town. The topography of the upper section of Boulder Creek is also a little flatter. You know, we have the upper section, basically that mile marker 32 or 33 up to 29, and that water is just the flow coming out of Barker, and it's also over flatter terrain. This includes some areas like Rogers Park, where Trout Unlimited came in and did some stream improvements, narrowed the stream channel, you know, and basically made it so that the water or improved the water quality and the habitat so that some of these fish can winter over a little bit better. Once you get into the middle section of the creek, which would basically be from maybe Sugarloaf up to that mile marker 33, the terrain is very steep, and that's some of the, you know, some of the steepest gradients encountered on Boulder Creek. And for that reason, when you add that flow from North Boulder Creek, that water is, white water and unfishable. But late in the season, when the flows drop, that tends to be where we advise people to go fish. It might be white water until August 1st, but come August 1st with lower flows, all of a sudden wonderful pools open up. And that's a great spot to go. And again, it sounds, redundant, but a dry dropper rig in there with your favorite dry dropper setup tends to do really well. So as we bounce around on Boulder Creek, we start off fishing that upper section as the flows start to drop. The lower section, which would be from Sugarloaf downstream down to town, that's basically from mile marker maybe 41, which is the edge of town, up to 36. The terrain in there is also flatter. So where's fishing good on Boulder Creek throughout the course of a year changes a little bit. We start off fishing the upper, and then the upper starts to get skinny, and we drop down to the lower, and then the lower starts to get skinny, and then we move into that steep middle section by Boulder Falls. There's literally like the same bugs throughout these sections. There's a few more yellow sallies on the bottom section and a few more bigger stones. Not necessarily big enough populations of these to say I'm going to fish a size 6 chubby Chernobyl or a size 6 Amy's Ant. But one of the things to think about with Boulder Creek is sometimes these fish are so small and they're moving so fast when they come to eat your dry fly that they themselves miss. So that's why we recommend some of these attractors, whether it's an Amy's Ant, a hippie stomper, a chubby, a micro chubby, in like 16s, 14s, and 12s, because it's small enough for some of these smaller fish to be able to latch onto it. Many times I've seen a fish try to eat a real hopper that's just too big. If they could get together and pull on opposite ends of it, maybe they could make it happen. But a hopper that's 2 inches long, a 6-inch fish just struggles to get that thing in his mouth and keep it in there. So the water, cleaner at the top, dirtier at the bottom. For me, I like some of the steep stuff in late summer that leads up to the falls as some of the best. And with the creek, experiencing flows that are between 10 CFS and maybe as high as 500 or 600 in a runoff year, you can see that certain areas become more fishable, and certain areas become less fishable. So for me, I check the flows, and I check the flows usually at Oradell. Oradell is a stream gauge that's located right around 4 Mile Canyon, and I'm typically, looking for the most fishable water. And to me, that means I'm looking for flows that are probably between maybe 50 and 150 CFS. At flows above 150, you're going to start to see like where are you going to fish and where you're going to find fish shrink a little bit, as the white water expands perhaps. And then it flows below 50, you start to see, well, I'm definitely not going to get them over here, and I'm not going to get them over here because it's just not deep enough. I like to tell people anything that looks to be like knee deep or deeper is great water to fish on Boulder Creek. Anything that's ankle deep is probably not gonna hold fish. And again, fishable water, it's, to me, I like to go in there and to these spots and be like, yeah, the whole creek's in play. And when the whole creek's in play, then you can just drive up the canyon and basically pull over just about anywhere you want to. A good tactic when you fish Boulder Creek is to find an area that you'd like to fish, park, and then maybe walk downstream to make sure you're not, there's nobody fishing, then drop in and fish back up to your car. If you follow somebody that's fishing the creek, or you maybe fish a section of water that somebody else has fished, an hour before you, the chances are that you're not going to get a lot of fish. And the fish, I like to describe it, I feel like these fish are like spring-loaded, ready to explode on any fly that hits the water. So any little pocket, and the pocket can be as big as a basketball, it could be as big as your kitchen table, but literally 3 casts is what I like to do. They're going to eat it 95% of the time on the first cast, maybe 5% on the second cast, And on the third cast, they've seen it, they've already tried to eat it, and they're not into it anymore. So, you know, in a situation like that, I guess your choices are, do I change flies and show the fish another fly? And I would opt for saying, I'm just going to change fish, because the next fish might only be like 5 feet up, you know, in front of the next rock, behind the next rock. And it is literally like ambush water or pocket water. And when it's on, it's almost like you get one look, one eat, one slap, or one fish, you know, for every nice cast that you make into each of these little pools and little pockets. And sometimes I'm fishing with, you know, 15 feet of fly line out the tip of my rod, and rather than work more line and mend more line, I just move my feet. You know, can I hit the other bank? Yeah. Can I hit upstream 10 or 12 feet? Absolutely. I usually like to rock a shorter leader on some of these, like a 7.5 foot is max. That way I can get a little more fly line out the tip of the rod. I love the 3-weight in there. A 4-weight, great. A 5-weight, sure. Whatever you have. That's a picture of Castle Rock right there. That's a springtime photo. And you can see that the stream there is only maybe 12 to 15 feet wide. Castle Rock's a great little dirt road with a climbing access. A lot of climbers, a lot of cars, sometimes not a lot of anglers there. But this would be what you could see. This is what you would see if you went up above the falls to that flat section above Rogers Park. And it's low flows up there right now because it's dam regulated, and right now they're, you know, waiting on the runoff to fill the reservoir. I got a buddy who lives in Nederland, and I'll start calling him and I'll be like, yo, Pete, how high is the res? When is it going to spill? Because sending somebody up there the day it spills, you know, you got to, you know, give it a couple of days at least for, like, you know, the dirty water, the sticks, the leaves, and everything that's fallen into the stream bed for all that to push out and clear out. But wonderful drake hatches up there in the evening. But, you know, to me, it's the type of spot where the fish are not super selective on your fly. So having just, you know, a dry dropper set up and a few tungsten droppers and a few different little ants, beetles, you know, maybe some caddis, maybe a nice foam drake, something like that, that's going to be low maintenance. And just, you know, go up there and just cover water. You know, if you're covering water and you're not catching fish, I would typically say hop in the car and change your spot, because the chances are, like, if you aren't catching fish, it tends to be because somebody came through there already and spooked them, and they usually need, you know, maybe 3, 4, 5 hours to settle back down again before they'll bite again. And because of the small nature of the stream, you know, somebody moving up the edge or moving up, you know, in ankle, shin deep water, you know, you'll end up spooking a lot of the fish that you don't catch or don't have coming to the fly, that sort of thing. But again, my favorite is probably that last 1.5 miles up to the falls. It's kind of steep and a little bit more rugged. But Boulder Creek's not a spot where waders aren't necessarily mandatory, and certainly not, you know, if you can, you know, pop the other side of a little 20-foot stream with your, you know, 3-weight or 4-weight, something like that. Sometimes getting down to the creek can be a little bit difficult, but there's definitely some spots where you can pull over and park right next to it and, you know, get out and, you know, not have to deal with anything but, like, you know, a graded gravel road down to the river, that sort of thing. Some of
Randy,
those spots. Yeah.
You want to answer a few questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. Somebody is asking, what about night fishing in town?
Yeah, well, I mean, the picture of that brown was caught at night. So that brown trout that was 27 inches, absolutely. Catch him at night. You know, especially browns, more nocturnal. You know, right now I ran down to like 55th Street yesterday, and the water, you know, was about a foot of visibility. But, you know, for me, I'd go through there and just throw a streamer, you know, and just cover water, throw a streamer, you know what I mean, that sort of thing. But, you know, at night, absolutely. I personally haven't had a whole lot of luck with big fish and streamers. But some of the guys who work for me, they catch some big ones at 75th Street. They catch some big ones up by the library. They're throwing, you know, mini dungeons. They're throwing articulated flies, articulated Goldilocks, you know, and, you know, here's what happens sometimes. Guys fishing or girls fishing, you know, hooks a little like 6-inch brown, and then something comes out and whacks that fish when it's at the end of your line. So then you cut off and you put a streamer on and, you know, drift a streamer down through the same spot. So I definitely think that night fishing through town is, you know, absolutely appropriate. You know, obviously a headlamp and whatever you need to make sure that you can get it done. But yeah, absolutely, I'm all for it.
All right. Somebody else wanted to know, did wildfires affect the Boulder Creek runoff?
Well, yeah. So wildfires, I can remember being at a section of South Boulder Creek and hiking up out of Walker Ranch one time and seeing this plume of smoke. And there was a fire, up around Gold Hill and up 4 Mile Canyon. So the fires have affected. The fires that happened in October will affect Left Hand Creek most likely and the South St. Vrain a little bit. So that won't affect Boulder Creek just because where the fire line is in drainages to the north of Boulder Creek and South Boulder Creek. But 4 Mile has continuously been the culprit, bringing us dirty water a lot of the time. And 4 Mile is only 2 miles outside of town, so sometimes, like I said, just getting above 4 Mile, it's the cream in your coffee is what it is.
And somebody else was asking, and I know you were going to discuss this, but they're asking about the impact of the gasoline spill on St. Vrain.
Yeah. So what I've learned in talking with a couple of people who either police officers or just people that I know, that customers who live in Lyons, is that gas tanker last Tuesday in the rain went off on the north side of Highway 36, which was right at the Wooden Apple Valley Road Bridge. I think the road on the opposite side there is called Stone Canyon, maybe. And 2,000 gallons of gas went into the riparian habitat. Now this was not on, he didn't go down into the creek. He went on to the opposite side, the north side. Creek would be on the south side there, but they still lost hundreds, if not thousands of fish through town, or from that bridge downstream and into town. The size on the fish was everything from, 3-4 inch browns all the way up to 20-inch browns. Some of the places there where they have private property, there were some rainbows that got lost. It smelled like gas, I guess, all the way down into the town of Lyons. And interesting to me, somebody told me that all of the irrigation ditches were still on while this happened, which means all that irrigation water that's going out in these ditches to farmers to irrigate crops somehow just ended up, going for whatever use it was still intended for, I guess, which seemed a little odd to me to think that here a spill happens and they don't shut down anybody pulling water off of the creek. But, again, I don't know too much about how long it takes for that to dissipate, those sort of things. And I don't know what's going on with the organization that owns the truck and the driver, that sort of thing. I know the EPA was out there. I think they might even still be out there, because I've seen some pictures from some friends that have shown me some of the crews and what's going on. And originally thought to be 1,000 gallons, and they found a culvert, I guess, that some of the gas leaked into. But again, everything in there, the crayfish, the fish, just a lot of dead ones. Kind of sad to see. Definitely be it'd be at least a year. I personally wouldn't think that you could go in there and do great this season. The water's on the higher side right now, and the flows below Button Rock are above 150, and it's moving pretty good. If you wanted to go to Lyons and fish somewhere around Lyons, explore the South St. Vrain. There's National Forest access just outside of town. It's a lovely spot. It drains out of the Brainerd Lake area. There's a spot up Left-Hand Canyon up towards Jamestown called the Ceran St. Vrain, Ceran, and that's a great spot to go and do a little bit of hiking, a little bit of fishing, and it's usually not that impacted by runoff. So yeah, I like the South St. Vrain personally a little bit more than that North St. Vrain, just from a standpoint of having better access. But I don't know that fishing, and certainly if anybody who enjoys Button Rock, go up and fish Button Rock and the inlet to Button Rock, and fish along County Road 80, and even fish down to that Rainbow Bridge. But that truck, it was just at that Rainbow Bridge where that truck turned over, and again, I guess it was pretty nasty. The smell of the gas was down in town for like a day or so for those folks. So kind of sad to see, and hopefully there's some sort of accountability I would assume, and again, I don't know, but I would assume that that company has some sort of insurance that, that can, help make it right.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. So I guess maybe, is there any other questions about, well, we'll talk about the access on the middle Boulder Creek. There's a lot of access. We talked about town, we talked about canyon. People always ask, is it private? Where will I know? How do I know where to park? There's literally almost every mile has 1, 2, or 3 gravel pull-offs that you can, pull the car in, and they're off the road enough to allow you to rig up. There's somewhere you can pull right down to the river. So there's plenty of access, and sometimes you'll see a lot of cars, but not a lot of anglers. There's a lot of climbing that goes on in that creek. Really don't see a whole lot of kayakers, and that's why like getting out of town and up in the canyon is perhaps better than fishing through than trying to fish through town. And again, like I just think it's great. The pocket water that Boulder Creek has, and the variety of water that you can find on Boulder Creek. You can you bounce around. You're on the upper, and then 3 weeks later you're on the lower, and then later in the summer you're in the middle. But tend to be that I'm fishing the same setup the whole time, which is a dry dropper, like a deer hair ant with a Frenchie below it. And it's not like, to me, it's not about matching the hatch. It's just about showing the fly to more fish. And that's who catches more fish? Somebody who makes 100 casts at one fish, or somebody who makes 1 cast at 100 different fish. So that's the way I tend to treat Boulder Creek, and it always has me catching fish, as many as I want, in many instances. It's just, to me, about just covering a little bit more water and showing it to more fish. And literally, like, when you make a good cast into any little pocket pool, and again, it could be as small as a basketball or as big as a kitchen table. I might spend a little more time at some of those bigger pools that are a little bit deeper, maybe switch the fly, but usually I'm just switching the fish, and that's my, key to success. And that's, kind of what I recommend for people to do, because again, that they usually eat it on the first 2 casts. It's not like all of a sudden it looks better on the 3rd cast. Again, they're kind of like spring loaded. They're like, ready to eat the first thing that they see. And if nobody's come through there and spooked them, they'll eat your fly almost no matter what it is. Purple haze, parachute Adams, elk hair caddis, just make it low maintenance, in my opinion. And so the flows, we'll talk about the flows a little bit. North Boulder Creek, with only 1 stream gauge, which was at Oradell, a lot of times it's hard to figure out what's going on with the different flows. Once you get, into this time of the year, we start to check Oradell, and Oradell is like, going to give you the flow right there at 4 Mile Canyon. But also once the reservoir spills, we see flows that are, 300, 400, even 500 CFS. Oftentimes, though, that flow on the upper won't be but half of that. So it's a bit of a guessing game, but once the reservoir gets full, I usually look at the middle Boulder Creek at Netherland gauge and kind of think that inflow into the res equals outflow. And that way I can kind of have a little bit better estimate of what's going to be going on the upper. But the upper, again, nice and flat, lots of spots to pull over, less water, clearer water. So, just remember with Boulder Creek, especially like when you go up in the canyon, what you see at the bottom of the canyon is not what you're going to see at the top of the canyon. Typically, it's going to get clearer, and it's also going to be a lot less flow as you get up there onto that top 3, 4, 5 miles. It also doesn't receive a whole lot of fishing pressure on that upper section, because I guess people get discouraged by what they see. But the upper section, some of the cleaner water, cooler temperatures, really good bugs. The drakes up there in the evenings are sometimes real fun to fish. A foam drake, a parachute Adams, a parachute purple. Again, I don't find that the fish are too discerning there. And with the textured water that you have with pocket water, the fish doesn't have time to study the bug. They just move quick and try to eat it. And if you are getting a lot of fish that are slapping at it and you're not hooking up, it might be that you just need to downsize the size of the fly and make it, just better for a little bit easier for a small guy, to eat. And hence that's why, a 3-weight with a dry dropper, tungsten bead underneath a chubby Chernobyl. And I know I've said chubby Chernobyl, but You know, I tried to buy all these crazy new, wonderful terrestrial looking flies, and all anybody wants is a chubby Chernobyl because it floats good and they can see it, you know. Plenty of pullouts. And if I had to say, like, what months is the canyon most fishable, I would say that the best fishing, and you know, and to me, it's all about bugs, meaning like, you know, when is the food available? When is the cafeteria open? We have our best bugs and best hatches in July and August. That's when there's the most food available. That's also when it's perhaps the most fishable. So I think that those 2 months are probably the two best months if you wanted to come and spend some time on Boulder Creek. You know, town is fine, but there's a lot of camping through town as well, and a lot more people. And sometimes I'm trying to judge my day more by how many other anglers I see as opposed to how many fish I catch. So if you're looking, you know, I think out of town and in the canyon is a little bit prettier than in town sometimes. Not that Boulder's not a, you know, pretty town. We just, town has some issues. That's all. Any other questions about Boulder Creek? Okay, I'm going to move on to South Boulder Creek, and we'll talk about South Boulder Creek and Walker Ranch. So South Boulder Creek and Walker Ranch. Walker Ranch is basically about a 3-mile section of water that does not have any roads next to it. There's several different access points and different trailheads to access it. But this is a spot that if you want to lose yourself in the moment, if you want to feel like you're out there and not hear a Jacob brake and not hear a Harley Davidson, this would be the spot to go. There's several different access points, and you can hike 1.2 miles or you can hike 200 yards. We had a young lady in here the other day that went to the Walker Ranch parking lot and made the hike down and fished, and fishing was great, but she came back in and she's like, well, I don't want to go there because the hike coming out of there was terrible. So I showed her what's called the kayak run. So if you type in on a smartphone, South Boulder Creek kayak run, it will take you to a small parking lot off of a dirt road or a gravel road called Gross Dam Road. From Boulder, the access would be to drive up Flagstaff Road, roughly 12 miles all the way to Gross Reservoir. And then about 2 more miles down this Gross Dam Road, on the left-hand side is the kayak run parking lot. Kayak run parking lot is where the kayakers put in when they're going to run this section of river. Typically, the flows for the kayakers to be running this section of river are like 500, 600 CFS, which is much, much higher than what I would consider to be a safe or a reasonable flow to go in there and fish. And it's a tailwater, so we can check the flows for South Boulder Creek. There's South Boulder Creek below Gross Reservoir. There's gauge there. And so, you know, flows in there sometimes can be 5 CFS. You know, like many tailwaters that are regulated, you know, they have a historical average, and the average and the historical average of 5 CFS is what they've agreed to not turn that tailwater below. 5 CFS is problematic when it's, you know, minus 10 degrees outside, and you know, we would probably have some bigger fish in South Boulder Creek if we could, you know, sustain a minimum flow of maybe like 25 CFS or something like that. So because of the fact that, you know, it's a tailwater and it has a minimum flow of just 5 CFS, it doesn't necessarily behave like some of the other tailwaters that have higher minimum flows. It does have mysis in the reservoir. Unfortunately for, you know, the everyday angler, the upper 2/3 of a mile of South Boulder Creek are closed and owned by Denver Water. There's some fish up there that, you know, are as big as some of the fish that you find on the Blue. You know, they eat a lot of mysis, especially at higher flows. When the flows start to get above 125 CFS, we start to see the mysis be an effective pattern through Walker Ranch. We also see the Rainbow Warrior be a really good fly in there. The red zebra midge is really good. The poison tongue is outstanding as well. And these are all flies that tend to fish good, you know, through the winter, early into the spring, and even into, like, you know, the months of May when a lot of places are seeing bigger bugs. We're still using little midge patterns, little Betas patterns, little RS2s. They do get a healthy winter stone hatch in there that is kind of February till May. They tend to be like little grains of wild rice. They're so small. So, very generic black, nymphs like copper johns tend to work really well. I fish a lot of like a black pheasant tail in there, or some other little small stones in there. And we tend to fish, a shallow 2-fly nymph rig in there, or again, dry dropper. Hate to say it again, I'm a bit of a dry dropper whore. But it's a great way to present a nymph, and nymphs catch fish, but it also has a dry fly in play in case you get one that wants to eat a dry fly. Those flows, 50 is a great flow. I'd say that the most fishable water in there is probably realized somewhere between maybe 25 and 100 CFS. This is a steeper canyon. It's got some sections where you'll get walled out when you're walking around in there. And depending upon your fitness level, you can go to that South Boulder Creek kayak run and hike 200 yards and be, on the river. The caveat to that is that you are at the upper edge of Walker Ranch property. So there's a no trespassing sign upstream. So all the access would be, down and to the left. Other trailheads that you can use to access Walker Ranch. One is called the Main Walker Ranch Loop, or the Main Walker Ranch Lot. The other one is called Ethel Herald. Ethel Herald is a trailhead off of Piker Road. It will give you access to the bottom of Walker Ranch. And what Walker Ranch is it's about 3 miles of water that has about an 8-mile hiking and biking loop that's circumnavigates it. So, bikers and hikers are using it, but, we use these different trailheads to gain access to different, sections of water. The Main Walker Ranch Lot is a pretty steep hike. The Ethel Herald one is even steeper, but, it's the road less traveled. So if you would prefer to not see anybody and don't mind maybe 600 feet of elevation gain and, 1.2 miles uphill the whole way, coming out, that is, then that's a great spot to go. And, we always tell people to go to the upper spot first, and then maybe the Walker Ranch, and then the lower. Interestingly enough, at the right flows, we've done a shuttle where we parked a car up at the kayak run and then drove down to Ethel Herald, and then 3 of us fished up through there over the course of one day, because the access and getting to that middle section of Walker Ranch is the water that doesn't get touched quite as much. And I think everybody knows that fish that don't see flies on a regular basis are easier to catch, and you have that feel good day. And this section of water down there, to me, really hits its peak and its stride in late July, August, September, and even into October. So I kind of think that, Boulder is slightly blessed from the standpoint of having 2 waters, Boulder Creek and South Boulder Creek, that necessarily don't fish the same or fish their best at the same point in time. The hatches on South Boulder Creek at Walker Ranch tend to be, there's a great shot of Gross Reservoir, and then that's, right there, that is the South Boulder Creek. That's Lower Walker, right at where the Ethel Herald trailhead would dump you out onto the stream. And that looks like a fall picture based on some of the yellow colors and whatnot there. So I like to call this place the bug factory. It's cold water. It's water that you pretty much, almost everybody I know wears waders in there, and only a few people wet wade. And when they wet wade, it tends to be, late July and August when the flows are maybe below 100. I would say it's cold like the frying pan, and that water's cold. It's you come out of there and your legs are, if you wet wade, your legs are all pink from the cold water. But that cold water helps out in late summer. You have flows of maybe 125 CFS, and you could have 6 or 7 different bugs down in there. And the drakes that we get down in there in September are sometimes just amazing. I've had days where they'll eat your dropper, and then as you're fighting that fish, the dry fly is banging into the surface of the water, and another fish will eat that fly. Or I've had a fish eat the dry and the dropper. So, to me, I like to go in there and fish when there's a lot of bugs and when those drakes are around. And that tends to be, flows that are below 125, and it tends to be late in July, August, September. I've even had really good days dry fly fishing down in there the week of Thanksgiving. And, if we have a slightly warmer fall, that big pool of water that's Gross Reservoir upstream, holds temperature really well. And, you get the warmest water of the year is like September down there. And that's when you get a lot of the good hatches. And, I've seen PMDs, blueing olives, caddis, drakes, red quills, all in the same day, that's a lot of food. And, the more food that's down there, this good slide here, it shows you the mysis. That's a Charlie's mysis on the right slide there. And that's a natural little drake there in between a couple of just drake and stonefly patterns. And then that fish on the left is, one that ate the foam drake and the soft tackle pheasant tail. And I like a soft tackle pheasant tail down in there, like a size 14 or 16, just because it looks a little bit like every single bug that's down in there. And sometimes, the water will be just boiling with fish, taking dries off the surface. Some of the best days I've had on South Boulder Creek have been overcast days that spit slightly. So, it's knocking these helicopters, like the drakes, they're like little helicopters, and here comes the rain and it knocks them back down onto the water. So you got bugs hatching and bugs getting knocked out of the air back down on the water. And it's just, like a veritable feeding frenzy. But Walker Ranch and the Walker Canyon, definitely a spot to take extra water with you. Definitely a spot to, be prepared to be out there, take some food, that sort of thing. The trails are good, but they deteriorate as you get towards the middle of that section of river. And that's, I tell people, keep hiking downstream till the trail deteriorates. And, once the trail's gone, you're getting into water that doesn't get fish very much. So, I feel, the quote that I use is, here's South Boulder Creek. It's 12.5 miles away, but you feel like you're 100 miles away because there are no roads next to it. It's a spot that's great for hiking if that's something that you want to do. And then this slide here is great. Other South Boulder Creek access points. I kind of told you early in the presentation, we talked about Rollinsville, the interpretive site. That's 2.4 miles west of the town of Rollinsville. It's going to be higher elevation. I'd say it's a freestone stream, but it's got that weird, tunnel bringing water through from the Fraser through the Moffett Tunnel. And yeah, you can go up in there. It's like, this was the thought of a crazy individual 15 years ago, that the water coming through the Moffett Tunnel, the 7 miles that it is long, would warm up. As it's coming through the tunnel, it's going to like warm up because the tunnel itself and the landmass would keep that water, moving, so that I could go up in there and fish that outflow to that in the month of January. Well, you can fish it. It freezes up after like the first 100 yards, but it was maybe not super foolish, but I thought it was kind of unique to try to go up there in January and like fish that water coming out of the tunnel. Caught a few fish, but that's maybe not the best spot to spend your time in January.
Hey, Randy.
Yeah.
One more question. Somebody's had recent back surgery and they want to know, like, what's the easiest access out of these? So where would be an easy place to go if you were kind of limited due to back surgery?
Yeah. So on South Boulder Creek, one of the spots that would be appropriate would be this interpretive site. Absolutely. The interpretive site is 20 feet from the river. So 20 feet from the river, like any river, it's going to have some rocks. It's, grassy banks, gravel bars, that sort of thing. But that's a spot where the hike is not going to wear you out and have you in a position of worrying about getting back to your car. Within Walker Ranch, the best trailhead to use would be that South Boulder Creek kayak run parking lot and the trail there. It is 250 yards to the stream, and it maybe is about 150 feet of elevation gain. So, if you can handle, I guess, like a short, a couple 100-yard hike up some stairs, that would be the most appropriate spot to go. The other two hikes are 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 miles with much more elevation gain. And that was like, I told you that one lady came in and she wanted to go back to South Boulder Creek. She did not want to hike up the Walker, hike up the hill to get back to her car at the main Walker Ranch lot. So we recommended the kayak run parking lot. She came back in. She was super pleased, much easier of a hike. So I think that would be the most appropriate two spots there that we've talked about so far. Another spot that is on South Boulder Creek that has easier access is El Dorado Canyon State Park. El Dorado Canyon State Park has its own stream gauge. So you can check flows on South Boulder Creek at El Dorado Canyon State Park. What you realize out of the bottom of Gross Reservoir is not always the same as that you realize at El Dorado Canyon State Park. They have a ditch that they turn off and on, and the ditch runs water to Ralston Reservoir and then on down to Denver. I think it's going to be linked up. There's a really large project where I think they're putting in a water treatment facility just north of Golden along 93. They've been doing construction for like 2 years now, but I think that that's where some of that water is eventually going. So the usually less flow at El Dorado Canyon State Park than below the dam because they're pushing water down to that reservoir sometimes. In El Dorado Canyon State Park, maybe 3/4 of a mile total water, flatter at the top, easier access, flatter at the bottom, and steep in the middle. So if you want to check out South Boulder Creek at El Dorado Canyon and you're maybe a little bit mobility challenged, I'd say the top would be the best spot to check out. And then, you know, I can remember going to El Dorado Canyon State Park one time with a guide trip, and, you know, we're fishing, and here came a school bus with like 30 little 6th grade boys, and they started throwing rocks at me. So I guess, you know, to me, like some of these spots where you got, you know, buses with kids showing up in camps and stuff like that, trying to get there early is a little more appropriate. I don't actually think they were throwing rocks at me. I think they were throwing rocks in the river. I just took it personally. There are also other spots to fish. The flatland of South Boulder Creek. So the flatland to me is anything that is going to be east of El Dorado Canyon State Park. You can access this using there's a trailhead off Marshall Road. The Mesa Trailhead gives you a little bit of access as well. And then further downstream, there's Bobo Link. There's even East Boulder Rec Center. That picture there is from a section of South Boulder Creek that is upstream of South Boulder Road, but downstream of the town of Marshall. And this is a section of water that's very unique. You have, you know, resident brown trout that are, we'll say 6 to 16 inches. But, you know, certain times of the year, we find rainbows that are 24 inches in there. When the flows on the creek come up, and South Boulder Creek's a little unique. You know, a lot of times the water from South Boulder Creek never actually makes it to Boulder Creek, to the confluence. It's diverted into this ditch, that ditch, and sometimes, like, you know, there's less water as you go downstream. Some of the water eventually goes on to the power plant right around Arapahoe. There's a diversion. The rest of it makes it into a pond called the KOA Pond over by Western Disposal, which is kind of 55th and Pearl, 55th and Valmont. But there's a reservoir out there called Cherryvale Reservoir or Baseline Reservoir. And there's a couple of ditches that run to that reservoir off of this road, off of this creek here. And so this time of year, when the reservoir is full, as it is, there's rainbows that, you know, just trying to do their thing. They're leaving that reservoir and running up through some of the ditches and getting into South Boulder Creek. You know, and every now and then I have somebody come in the shop. They're like, yeah, I just got broken off by like a big fish on South Boulder Creek. So right now we actually have some fish in South Boulder Creek that are rainbows that have run out of Baseline Reservoir up these little tiny irrigation ditches, and then they get into this water system, and then you can find them periodically from South Boulder Road all the way up to the town of El Dorado Springs. There is a closure currently on that where you're not allowed to wade it because of zebra mussels. But some of my guides have been out there messing around, talking to the game wardens, or maybe not the game wardens, maybe the rangers, and there you can fish it. You just can't get in the water. So it's kind of interesting. We have this one little kid, Noah, who comes in the shop all the time, and he catches a lot of fish out there. But it's like, it just shows you how these fish in nature try to try to make it happen and try to spawn and reproduce. These fish are leaving the lake and traveling up this little irrigation ditch to get into some water, but and they can't help but do it, just because it's what they're supposed to do this time of the year. Yeah, so that's some of the other access that's on South Boulder Creek. But personally for me, I like that Walker Ranch spot the best. For the individual who maybe has some mobility issues, Castle Rock on Boulder Creek in the canyon. Castle Rock is roughly mile marker 30. That's a great spot where there's a gravel road right next to the creek, a little spot to pull down. You don't have to walk too far. There's also another spot called Doherty Park. Doherty Park is right outside of town, right by the tunnel, and that would be in the lower canyon. So Boulder, Boulder Canyon and Boulder Creek probably has a little bit more user-friendly water from the standpoint of like, you're not going to have to hike a long way to get to and from the stream. And many of the accesses, it might be just more like a gravel bank, a soft bank, as opposed to big boulders. Some of the spots in the canyon, big boulders, tough access, rocks have moved and slipped and that sort of thing since the flood. But there are a lot of spots that are definitely on the easier side. For the individual also with some mobility issues, there's a spot on Left Hand Creek. It's called Buckingham Park. You leave Boulder heading north like you're going to Lyons, turn left at the Greenbrier, and it's up the road there a few miles on the right-hand side. And that's another spot that where the access is going to be easier for an individual who maybe has some challenges, needs a staff, that sort of thing. But that Walker Ranch stuff might be the longer hikes, obviously, like later on once you've recovered a little bit more, might be more appropriate. I think I've touched on the bugs. Is there any other questions that anybody has about any of this stuff?
There's one more question that came in. Somebody wants to know about access at Pine Cliff. Yeah,
so Pine Cliff. So is anybody from Lincoln Hills? If I say Lincoln Hills, right away you should be thinking $35,000. Lincoln Hills is, and I'll get to the Pine Cliff access after I talk about Lincoln Hills. Lincoln Hills private fishing club, very expensive. It's on South Boulder Creek. The road that you use to access it is called South Beaver Creek Road. It's upstream of Pine Cliff a ways. There's a lot of escapee trout that make their way downstream, some that make their way upstream. The access that I've used primarily at Pine Cliff, and between Pine Cliff and Rollinsville, the public access seems to be going away in favor of privatization of some of the land. But there is good access, and we hike the railroad tracks downstream from Pine Cliff a lot. There's a little tiny small tunnel right at Pine Cliff. And that water is, I feel like a lot of the time when they built the railroads, they kind of like maybe straightened the stream bed a little bit. So the access in Pine Cliff, definitely a little bit more hike downstream along the railroad tracks, a little bit more difficult, a little bit more boulder scrambling. There's some tunnels if you want to go even further that you either have to go through the railroad tunnel or go down to the stream and hang onto a chain that's bolted into the side of the river. I've done well at Pine Cliff. The stuff right around Pine Cliff is mostly privatized, but once you get downstream of Pine Cliff towards the reservoir, there's definitely more access. You could also use the Osprey Point Trailhead. Osprey Point Trailhead is a trailhead that can be accessed off of that Gross Dam Road if you were going to go fish the kayak run. And it is the trailhead that's at the boat ramp for Gross Reservoir. It takes you around the south side to the southwest over to the inlet at Gross. Some people come back saying they've caught lake trout over there. People come back saying they've caught muskie over there. Definitely kokanee salmon. Gross has got kokanee salmon, and hence the mysis shrimp in there to feed the kokanee salmon. So at certain times of the year, the inlet can be a good spot to go. Typically April and May, pretty good to go over there to the inlet to catch some bigger rainbows. I don't ever personally catch a big one on either of these streams, but I've definitely seen rainbows and browns in each of them that are, 20, 22, 24, 26. And, with the reservoir there's definitely opportunity for fish to leave and head upstream or, come back down and into the water or into the reservoir. A lot of the guys who like to go to the Osprey Point Trailhead and fish the inlet will go over there with a sink tip and maybe throw some streamers and pull some streamers like in that, 40 or 50 yards of water where the river drops into the reservoir and then starts to get slow and tanky as it, loses its momentum. And I've seen some nice fish from there as well. that Osprey Point Trail, about 2 miles, take you maybe like 35, 40 minutes to get over there to the inlet. I would expect to see some spin heads over there and bait dunkers and stuff like that too. They always, we always get the call about, the treble hook with the big, piece of lead on it for snagging, in the fall when people are chasing the kokanee, and it's just leaves me scratching my head sometimes. But I guess it's still fishing a little bit, right? But yeah, so that's another access point. The other stuff on the flatland is very, very seasonal. I think that the focus on this was Walker Ranch, because Walker Ranch is in play just about every day of the year, depending on what the flow is. And I've seen wonderful flows all winter long. I've also seen them drop it to 5 and then 2 feet of ice forms, that sort of thing. And Boulder Canyon, while town is open year round, I really think the best fishing is realized outside of town. It's just better bugs, more access, more to see, less people bothering you, less, trash to worry about stepping in, stepping on, that sort of thing. So I think that, both of those streams, have a lot to offer for somebody with a 3-weight, 4-weight, or 5-weight. And, I don't think it's technical where you got to get down to 6X. I use a short leader, 4X, 5X, 4 to the dry, 5 to the dropper. And, it's one of these things for me that to be able to go and do that because it's so close, is wonderful. It's almost like a gift. I'm sure for a lot of you, time on the water, whether it's listening to the water, catching fish, or rigging up, has been instrumental in, navigating the last, 16 months, and knowing what you have that, is in your own backyard, that you don't have to plan a whole, week around or something like that. The long days of summer are almost here, and a lot of this stuff's hidden in plain sight, and very fishable. And, I like to, try to fit it in almost every day if I could, in order to fit it in a busy day, which I'm sure we're all pressed for time. It's good to know what's available to you, right out your back door, so to speak. And, if anybody is coming and wants to come up here and fish these spots, you call me or call anybody here at the shop, and, which section of the creek is fishing best. Right now, like, if anybody wanted to go fish the creek, I would say don't waste your time in town. Don't waste your time in the lower canyon, but you'll get to drive past the lower canyon and middle canyon on the way to the upper canyon and take note of stuff that you notice that looks like water that appeals to you, because there's fish all throughout it. It's just a matter of like, which section to fish, at what time of the year. And again, don't be discouraged about seeing dirty water in town. I know right now you can go up to Castle Rock and probably have it all to yourself because everybody sees the dirty water and nobody wants to go up there. Does anybody have any questions?
Randy, where's this?
That's Walker Ranch. Walker Ranch, wonderful, lots of pine trees. If you were going to see a cat in Boulder County on one of the waters, that's probably where it would happen. Again, that's one of my most favorite spots to go. It's a little bit of effort sometimes to get in there, but you can just lose yourself in the moment. It feels like you're, it doesn't feel like you're, 15 miles from Boulder. Yeah, so I like the Walker Ranch a lot.
Did you say cat? C-A-T?
Yeah, like a mountain lion.
What?
I mean, like, I'm not saying you're going to see one. I've seen tracks down in there for sure, and seen like a carcass or something like that. But there's that's just the spot that, like, it's amazing that there's a place that's that wild that's only 15 miles from here. Mm-hmm. And again, don't get me wrong. Like, for me, I'm looking for a 4 or 6 hour window to go to South Boulder Creek. If I only have 2 hours, I'm just going to Boulder Creek. Again, I'm going to, spend less time driving and hiking and more time on the water. And, I feel like, even if it's only an hour, whatever time I can spend fishing or next to a stream is going to show up as a plus for me. Going to help me navigate my day to day for sure.
Excuse me, Randy?
Yes, sir.
Is there any, is there limited access to like Osprey Point or other areas above or below the reservoir now with the construction?
I don't know. There hasn't been anything limiting anybody going to Osprey Point. The kayak run has not been closed. There's definitely like, I haven't seen much in the way of trucks this year, but last year there were some trucks, and what it was doing more than anything was kicking up dust. But I mean, dust kind of sucks for a trout stream because it covers up your hatch beds and stuff like that. I mean, the mine up there right below Idaho Springs on Clear Creek is an example of dust, I guess. But there hasn't been any closed access off that road. The upper section, which is Pine Cliff downstream, it's interesting. I got some customers that go up there and fish, and there's some interesting sort of sneaky spots upstream of Pine Cliff a little bit where there's a couple of railroad trestles that go over the stream. And there's a lot of dredging going on, like independent guys up there dredging for gold and stuff like that. And that can kind of mess with the fishing a little bit because it makes the water dirty sometimes. But these guys, they said some of these holes that they've created in the bottom of the river are like 8, 10, 12 feet down. So they've created some spots where some of these trout, end up living. But again, every year these guys that go up there and fish some of these spots that are trying to chase an escaped big boy from Lincoln Hills, they keep saying that there's no trespassing signs, more people yelling at them. So, I mean, I think, if that's what you're into, great. But I'm not going to I don't want to send anybody to go to a spot where somebody's going to come out and start yelling at you, you know what I mean? And have a, that sort of situation. But, 10-pounders make men behave like boys sometimes, I guess,
All right. Any other questions for Randy? Thank you so much, Randy, for doing this presentation. We really appreciate it. Yeah.
It was my pleasure, guys. And like I said, if anybody, or guys and gals, if anybody is, going to come and fish the creek, I would definitely say you should stop by. We'll write down on a mile marker where you should go. There's certain pull-offs. Look for this blue bridge, look for that blue bridge, hike down, fish back upstream. The only time that I feel like, when I'm not catching fish on these rivers, it tends to be because I'm following somebody else. You know what I mean? Like, ooh, there was another guy up around the bend, or I'm following right behind. We've played leapfrog before where the 3 of us from the shop go, and it's the guy that's downstream is always the one who's not catching fish because the stream sometimes is so small that if somebody walking up the bank ends up spooking them. So, but that's all I got. I appreciate the opportunity to present on little tiny streams like that. I mean, it doesn't always have to be the trip of your lifetime, but certainly, having something on the horizon to look forward to keeps us going, keeps us getting out of bed, that sort of thing. But, don't overlook the small stuff in front of you. Like, every fish is a gift, right?
That's right.
Great program, Randy.
Right on. Thank you, Mark.